Hello, my name is Aubrey Wiley. Welcome to our home in Lynchburg, Virginia, and our railroad relic sculpture garden. From collecting date nails and discarded old railroad cross ties to actual railroad structures, our passion for collecting railroad memorabilia is manifested here, and we hope you'll enjoy your little tour here. Behind me is a classification light from the Virginian Railroad, engine number 468. It was a 282 type, and it was scrapped in 1959, very soon after the merger with the Norfolk and Western. Below it is a cast iron whistle post from the Norfolk and Western's Durham Division line. It may be an original to when that line was built in the late 1800s. The brass bell behind me was purchased from a retired yard locomotive engineer in Monroe, Virginia. I do not know what it came from, except that it is southern. The concrete milepost is from the Virginian milepost 141, which was just a couple of miles east of Abilene, Virginia. In 1916, this was the last milepost Buffalo Bill's circus train passed before it derailed. His circus lost many animals in that wreck, but it continued on for a few months, and after that the Buffalo Bill Wild West show was ended. It is a first generation concrete milepost. There was another version of this milepost made before the concrete. It was made of wood, but I feel like this is a first generation concrete milepost dating from about 1915 to 1920. The Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad used concrete markers along their right-of-way to mark the edge of their property. The concrete marker that's on the right here came from the C&O's Lexington subdivision off of the James River subdivision. It was washed away when in the flood of 1972, and the line was abandoned. On the left is a Virginian Railroad whistle post. Railroads have whistle posts in advance of crossings of roads or streets at grade on the railroad. This is concrete, and it came from milepost 102.4 on the Virginian, which would be near Danieltown, Virginia, on the railroad's Norfolk Division. These switch stand lights are from the C&O Railway. The light with the red and green targets and lenses was used where a siding and the main line converged. The yellow and green light was located on a switch stand where a spur or side track converged with another spur or side track. The South River Lumber Company operated in Rockbridge, Nelson, and Amherst counties, Virginia, and closed at the age of 20 years after the chestnut blight of the 1930s. The line reached from its connection with the N&W at Vesuvius, Virginia, into the mountains for many miles. It would take 24 hours of continuous running to reach the end of every branch. This brake wheel was used on one of the line's skeleton log cars. The ND wood sign on the left is a replica made to company specifications and was attached to the 1926 brick interlocking tower where N&W and the C&O crossed at grade in Lynchburg. The Baltimore and Ohio Railroad had its own unique signals. They were called color position light signals, and this signal was manufactured in 1928. The lower part was made by General Railway Supply, while the upper indication light was made by Union Switch and Signal. It stood for over 60 years on the main line east of Parkersburg, West Virginia. The pole on the left has a unique Virginian finial on top. Pictures of Virginian signal installations sometimes show this type of finial on poles supporting relay cabinets. The searchlight signal is from the Virginian, and it was for westbound trains at milepost 421.1, which was near Page, West Virginia. It was manufactured by the Union Switch and Signal Company and placed in service in 1949 as an automatic block signal. It functioned on 10 volts. After the merger with the N&W in 1959, N&W extended train links and the operating blocks of the railroad, and this signal was no longer needed and was taken down in the 1980s. Virginian had large wood phone boxes along its line at necessary locations, which they called call boxes. This one was near the motorcar shed of a section gang at Pineville, West Virginia, on the Virginian's Guyandotte River line. Inside is a correct Virginian wood hand crank phone with a jack box for the railroad worker to direct his call, either to the dispatcher or another nearby location along the line. In nearly every call box picture I have found, the door was secured by a stick or a bolt. They were rarely locked. A resident who grew up in Kellysville, West Virginia, has told me of how in the 1950s the railroad's call box was the only phone in town, and when an emergency arose, the call was made on the Virginian's phone to the dispatcher, who in turn would summon the needed response, be it the sheriff, rescue, or the fire department. The motorcar shed is a replica of a Virginian shed, but 2/3 scale. I built it and the 10-foot set-off track in front for my Virginian motor car. The colors are those adopted in 1948 and used through merger time in 1959. There is graffiti on the walls of the call box dating from the 1940s up until the late 1980s. There's one little poem in here that was written by a railroad worker who had time to kill, obviously, and it reads, I'll change the name to protect the innocent, by the way. It reads, "Old Joe Jones, conductor of his train, his head in the call box, his ass out in the rain." The motor car is a Fairbanks Morris Sheffield Model 41, built 1921, I believe. In studying the railroad AFE's, authorization for financial expenditure, I have found that these cars were built about the early 20s, anywhere from 21 to 25, and I believe this was one of the first ones that was purchased. It has a 8.5 horsepower 2-cylinder engine. It would run on either a mixture of gas and oil or kerosene and oil, and it was direct drive, meaning that when the engine was running, so was the car. To start it, the electric switch was turned on, and the operator pushed it and jumped on before it got away from it. This size car was probably used for a signal worker or or a lineman for the railroad. It was not large enough to be used for an entire section gang.